Hello, this is Steve with Pro Tools PC, and on this video I wanted to talk about importing session data. Importing session data should not be mixed up with importing audio, which is a complete different function. Session data refers to bringing in the data from other sessions, so this can be full tracks with or without the audio MIDI data on them, pan, volume, automation settings, all of your plugins, plugin settings, routing, everything like that. I have two situations I use it regularly. The first one is bringing in effect auxes, group auxes, my master section as examples. This comes out to 3 or 4 vocal aux buses, 3 or 4 bass guitar aux buses, 7 to 10 effect aux buses, my master aux, master fader. And then I also have tracks set up with the reference mixes I like to use that I can pull in quickly, so I can save a lot of time. The second situation I use it in all the time is typically with using the match tracks feature. I can pull in all of my plugin settings, pan settings, my bass volume settings, where I would typically do it from the first song of an album that I'm working on. The first song I got mixed, I'll import it into the other songs after that. There are obviously lots of other purposes, but these are quite common, so let's go ahead and have a look at it. As a side note, I would also recommend doing a save as before you start. And I recommend doing that in case anything goes wrong, you overwrite some data, you have problems, you always got something to fall back to. The problem here is some of you may know that the undo options in Pro Tools are kind of squirrely sometimes. Doing certain functions will completely delete all of your undo options, things like that. So you just want a way to fall back if needed. So let's pull up import session data. On Windows, you would do it with Alt-Shift-I for the shortcut, or you could just come over here and go to File, Import, and Session Data. As typical with many Pro Tools features, there are some more complex things, such as your track offset options here, which actually changes the start time of the imported data, applying sample rate conversion if needed, time code options, things like that are, most situations you're probably not going to use it, and, are really, I would say, geared towards the post crowd. And real quick up here under source properties, this is the session you are pulling everything into, and it just kind of gives you the basics of it, the session name, what version of Pro Tools you're using, time code formats, bit depth, sample rate, and your audio file types in the session. So under session data here and under import, I would say this selection here is more specific for workflows or specific sessions. Importing tempo meter maps is something you typically wouldn't do a lot. I use it with some of my songwriting templates that have my drum VIs all routed out to aux tracks and everything ready to go. Window configurations here, if you're a Windows configurations user, that's really nice because that, can immediately get your new session set up and familiar with your normal workflow. But it's pretty obvious here what it is going to import into your working session. So here under main playlist options is where things start to get a little more interesting and important. Typically, I'll just jump right down here, click on all, and deselect the clips and media. When you do that, you can see it untick some of the other options around it, alternate playlist, clip gain, clip effects. I do this in the situation of the tracks that I'm importing, especially if I'm wanting settings. I don't want to import the audio with them. I just want to import fader settings, pan settings, my routing, things like that. So if I do have tracks I want to import the actual audio on, I'll do that as a whole separate import process. So for volume and pan, mute, I typically like to just untick the mute. I'm not really worried about bringing that in. The volume and pan, I'll typically keep those I like to bring them in, more importantly, for the baseline settings. So I know that, say with my vocals or my guitars or whatever, that the volume settings, all the automation may be written on it, but I still kind of have those baseline settings on my volume and pan that I can tweak, obviously, as I need to, but I kind of have the relative idea of where my levels are, say, during the chorus, verse, things like that. And down here, these are things I typically would not shut off except for specific situations. My output assignments, my plugins, all my plugin settings, my hardware inserts, anything like that. I typically always just want to keep that the same. Maybe untick track comments in some situations, but for the most part, all this stuff's going to stay. Stuff that don't matter, like the icon, or if you don't have heat installed, that's not going to affect anything if you just import it. So this brings us to the final section here under tracks. So on our left side, we got source. So this is where we're importing from, and then our destination, which is where what we're importing to, which would be our session that's open back here. The most perfect case scenario in your dream world is just to hit match tracks, and it will take everything between the two sessions that have the same name on the track and will just instantly just match all of the settings from your source right onto the destination track. So all your plugins, routing, everything, volume settings, all of that automatically to it on all the tracks that have the same name. Now, what is kind of weird that I don't have an exact answer for, is that in some situations, even if it doesn't have the exact same name, here I kind of made this example here, even though it's not the exact same name, I guess it takes it as close enough and still applies those settings. But for this situation, for my next example, I'll just go ahead and tick those to none temporarily. And then for the next sets of tracks are going to be tracks like my auxes, all of my type of stuff that I don't have in the session yet that I want to bring in. So in this case, my Vox auxes, reverbs, delays, my micro pitch shifting stuff, all of that I don't have in this session yet. So I want to bring all of those into new tracks. So the quickest way to do that, you can just click over here on the side and just drag if you want, and it'll automatically set them to new tracks. I could do that with all of my drum stuff over here. So I can do the same thing, just drag, pull in all of my drum tracks. And in this case, obviously I really wouldn't want to pull in my drum MIDI from my previous session. So I'll shut all that off. And in this situation, I'll just leave it to overwrite my drum VI for new settings on it as well that's coming from the source session. And then to go back, what I touched on a little bit ago is the situations where if I have tracks in the source that I want to match to a destination track, I can go in here and physically select them where I want them to go. And it's only going to select tracks that are still open and available. But in this case, I would want to go ahead and match that to my bass guitar, my distortion bass track here, distorted bass, my bass phase track, and my bass comp track would go to bass aux. So in situations where they don't match up, you can just manually assign them like that. But to do a whole session that way would be terribly slow, just one track at a time like that. Sometimes you got to do it. I just try to avoid it, and I love to use match tracks. Then when you have all that set how you want it, just click OK and wait. So as you can see, everything was imported. All of my tracks changed size to match what was on the original source session track size. Plugins are instantiated. My routing, aux sends are all set up, ready to go. And then typically from here, I would have to go through and move all the tracks where I want them to go. I'm not going to make a big deal of it, but I could, grab all of my effects tracks and pull them over here on the other side of the vocal tracks if I wanted to, things like that. So now I could just go through, set the session up how I want it, start making my tweaks, all of my changes to the volume settings, and I am good to go. So I hope this video was helpful. Thank you for watching, and feel free to contact us on our website with any questions or comments. Thank you.